Agile for Humans is brought to you by Audible.com. Get one free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/agile. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player, including Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time by Jeff Sutherland, and Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. Visit www.audibletrial.com/agile to enjoy your free audiobook today.
Processes and tools dominate today's Agile discussions, but we are devoted to the individuals and interactions that make it work. From the beginner to the veteran practitioner, we have something for you. Welcome to Agile for Humans.
All right, welcome to this week's episode of Agile for Humans. I'm your host, Ryan Ripley. Joining me tonight, Mr. Amitai Schleier. Amitai, so great to talk to you again, buddy. How are you?
Not bad. How are you?
Hey, it's a day, and I'm podcasting. I'm happy.
That's the stuff.
Also joining us tonight, Natalie Warnert. Natalie, it's a huge pleasure to have you on the show. Love your blog. Follow your work and on the conference scene. Just super excited you joined us. How are you tonight?
I'm good. We're staying up late for this.
So Natalie, you do a ton of work in the Agile community, especially a lot of speaking, a lot of writing. Most recently, I saw at the Agile 2016, the big conference last year, that you were heading up the Women in Agile discussion. I think it was a half-day event prior to the start of the conference. Can you give us a little information about that proceeding and how that came to be and just how it went?
Sure. So historically, I can't take credit for the entire movement by any means. There's been a ton of people that have been involved. When I got involved in it, it was back in 2013 at a Scrum gathering, and the topic came up in an open space. And a number of women there just got together and decided, hey, we want to actually talk about this a little bit more. From there, it kind of, got legs. We started doing some co-blog posts, got a lot of great help from people on that. Podcasts started, so that's really helped it to grow. I personally was just very curious about the phenomena of not just women in technology, but specifically women in Agile and just the trends that I was seeing. The main trend being that, hey, yeah, we have more men in technology, more men in Agile. However, proportionally, I'm seeing at conferences, yes, there are more men speaking and being active in the community, but proportionally, it still doesn't seem to be the same proportions as the community. And why is that? So I actually wrote my master's thesis on the topic of how do we get women to be more involved within the Agile and technology communities, and went through, did a lot of research there, a lot of primary research with interviews and surveys within the Agile community. And based on that, I had talked to a number of people at the Agile Alliance, and we wanted to get this pre-conference event going. And so last year was the first year. We had an amazing keynote in Cindy Morse. She works at Salesforce, and she's a vice president there and isn't originally from the technology side, so had a really unique viewpoint on the women in Agile and kind of the journey they're going through at Salesforce that she talked about. I'm on that transformation team there, and that team was actually mostly women. And then what we did was, kind of just made a forum for anybody that wanted to attend to, have a place to network and get to know each other, as well as talk about common issues, and just kind of get that momentum moving. Now, I think it was a great success for the first year, working on some new things for this coming conference, Agile 2017. Currently, the proposal is in the works of hopefully getting approved by the Agile Alliance in the next few days here. I think they're meeting. But looking at really taking it to the next level. All right, now instead of, more of the, what I would call the inform theme for last year, now looking at more of an empower theme, right? So how do we empower each other as women and as members of the Agile community to, really become more involved, and how can we help each other out? How can we ensure that we're not being exclusionary on any basis, including men? The problem of lower involvement really goes across so many different facets, and it's certainly not a women against men issue. And what I always like to say is it's really everybody's issue, and everyone's going to benefit from it as we continue to improve. The more women we have active in the community, the more diversity we have in the community from any facet, the more diverse ideas we're going to get, and that's really going to benefit the whole community. Kind of a quick rundown on Women in Agile, where it's been and kind of where it's going this year. A lot of other fun things that I have in the works being planned for that. Make sure to keep listening. I can't necessarily disclose them all because still having the fingers crossed on getting that approved.
Perhaps when we get closer to the big conf and the plans solidify, maybe you can come back and highlight it and promote it and preview it for the audience.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Perfect.
I'm really excited about it.
So so you have a master's in this area. You did your work, your thesis, essentially on women in Agile, women in technology. What is it about our community that has improved the ratio of participation?
Well, so a couple things. First of all, the reason that I really wanted to look at this in the first place was because I was noticing that the ratio didn't seem right. I started really becoming more involved in the Agile community back 2012, 2013, and now looking forward, we're in 2017, and I've seen a great improvement. I'm hoping part of that's from some of the, women in Agile work. Some of the other things that are different in the Agile community or in comparison to the technology community as a whole, is really what we value in Agile. We value a lot more of the interactionary things, the relationship-based things that stereotypically women are better at. But I think that stereotype and that bias has really helped to open that door and made the barrier for entry lower, at least from a perception perspective. I'll take myself, for example. I started out my first job out of college. I was a coder. I was writing websites and didn't know very much about Agile at all and got a little bit inundated. My first project actually was an Agile project. It was one of those ones where we didn't call it Agile, but ended up understanding that was what it was and that I really liked that. It was a little bit more on the soft skills side, which, not to say I was a bad coder. I mean, I wasn't amazing by any means, but that other arena that is not necessarily as prevalent in other technology careers that allows you to really, work with people a lot more, dealing with interactions and relationships. That's kind of what drew me in. I'm an Agile coach now, and I really enjoy doing that. I think that's part of the reason that we see those different ratios. On the other side of things, I haven't been overly present in the greater technology community for many years. But from things that I've read, the perception, I think, is that it's a little bit more hostile. And I feel like the Agile community is fairly inclusionary. It's a little bit tough to, break into certain things as it is with any industry. But I feel like, again, the barriers to entry are a little bit lower than we see in other industries or even, other facets of technology. But that's just my opinion. That wasn't exactly what my research was on. It was more around the lines of, yes, even though, maybe there's more women in Agile than there are in general technology, why are those women that are already within the Agile community less involved than men? That was more of what the research was centered around. So
interesting. So what is it about Agile coaching for you that makes you get up in the morning excited to go into work and looking to, meet the challenges of the day?
It's kind of the unknown. I never know what the problem is going to be. I don't necessarily know what situation I'm going to be in, and that unknown is exciting. It's exciting to work with a number of different teams, learn about a lot of different products. Everyone has, other teams have kind of some of their unique challenges. Then they also have similar challenges across teams. And it's really being able to be a part of helping them to get to those solutions, not just giving them the solution, but, really that interactionary thing where you can see as you're talking to teams, you can kind of see the light bulb come on after a while. And that's really exciting just with, hey, I've been working with this team for a while. I remember where they were back in, May, and now it's now it's November and I've seen just this drastic change, and that's really fun for me. So basically that's what gets me up in the morning. It's kind of the thrill of the unknown. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a thrill seeker, but I guess as I described it, it sounds a little more so.
So you're not skydiving this weekend?
No, I'm going to have a fairly quiet weekend in Wisconsin.
We have Amitai and I on the show here with you. Clearly, the Women in Agile topic is one that we're both very interested in, and we really enjoy this conversation. I think a big question that at least I have, and I'm sure Amitai would have as well, is how can we be supportive of this movement that you're spearheading and a big part of? How can people like Amitai and I be helpful?
The big thing I would say is just that, right? Lend support like you would to others. There's Twitter conversations going. There's a hashtag Women in Agile. There's obviously, the event that we talked about earlier. That's not a female exclusive event. Last year there were about 10% there that were males, and that was awesome. Just getting inundated and hearing kind of the different perspective that you don't necessarily think about. And, that helps the other side too. That helps women to hear men's perspective on it, just as far as, just things that we haven't thought to have discussions about. The other things, just speak up when you see a conference lineup that has all male keynotes, or, you're just not seeing a lot of diversity in there. Encourage those conference organizers to, diversify that so that we're getting a lot of different ideas, on your boards at your local agile organizations. Encourage people, encourage women, encourage everybody to become a part of it, from being a board member or even just asking questions. One of the things that came out, one of the biggest things I think that came out in my research, and it seems really simple, but I'll tell you a little story here. I was at a Agile user group meeting, and we were doing kind of a fishbowl thing where, folks were up on stage and answering questions, and, someone gets up and goes back to their seat and someone else comes and takes that seat. And at one point I realized, hey, you know what, there's all 5 people up there are guys, and there's about 30%, women in this audience. Why aren't there more women up there? And then one of the things that someone had said to me that I had kind of also realized was extend that personal invitation. I went up to a couple women and I said, hey, there's a lot of guys up there. I think you probably have something to contribute. You should go up there. Same thing if someone reaches out to you directly and says, hey, I think you should submit to this conference. I think you should be with me on this podcast. People are much more likely to do that. And so it's really extending that personal invitation in a day and age where we go further and further away from personal communication. So that's just a simple way that, you can help to show support. And back to the theme I was talking about earlier, help empower those people to become more involved and give them that support.
I'll add to that a little bit. The idea of, if you have a platform to share it, that's something that I think is easy when we're talking in a podcast context. Ryan has certainly had a lot of women on, and if he wanted to make a point of it, he could seek out more women on purpose, and I think to some extent he has. I could do the same. I have a podcast called Agile in 3 Minutes that I've just begun having guest hosts on, and I probably will make a point of looking to share it with women and people of color preferentially, just because it seems to be a platform that I now have, and I want to make sure that I do that. Another thing that I do is periodically, when I'm able to notice, I realize that I'm in kind of a self-reinforcing bubble, that the kind of people that I spend time talking to tend to connect me with the same kind of people that I spend talking to. And so if I don't take some effort to change who gets in, then I'll just get the same kind of stuff that I get. That's what social networks do. And so if you want a more variety of input in your social network, you have to seek it out. And so I try to notice every so often when I'm not seeking it out and do something about it. And then one more idea, which I got from a combination of Troy McGinnis and Kat Swatell, is that I know some people, if there isn't a code of conduct at a conference or a meetup, they won't go. And I can understand for some people why that's important. I don't have that problem, but I have started, thanks to Troy and Kat, that when I'm presenting at a meetup or a conference, whether or not there is a code of conduct in effect, I will highlight that fact either way in my slides for like the first couple slides, just to say, here's where it is. Here's a couple examples of what it says. I did this at Agile Testing Days, and I framed it in terms of examples and how you would test this, and maybe if you were to do some cucumber scenarios, and if you could automate it, that would be amazing, but forget about that. But, try to put it in context, and then move on, but just illustrate that there is a code of conduct, and here's why that's important to some people, or there isn't a code of conduct in that case, and here's how that might affect you. For instance, that some people that you could learn from are not going to be here.
Yeah.
So because I'm able to be a presenter sometimes, and because people listen to me sometimes, I've tried to be a little tiny bit more deliberate about what I do with the words that I'm allowed to say.
Yeah, that's a great example. Actually, I was talking to Linda Cook a few weeks ago about some of the ideas we had for the Women in Agile session this year, and code of conduct, and bringing it up and kind of sponsoring the larger dissemination of it was an idea that came up. And so I'm really glad you reminded me of that. Thank you.
It is an interesting community that we have, especially when I think about the people that I really look to and admire. And it's something that I haven't always put a lot of thought into, but Amitai just had Joanna Rothman on his podcast. She did a brilliant Agile in 3 minutes on management, or on managers. And Joanna is one of my favorite Agilists. And when you think about who else is in that upper echelon of Agile coaches and trainers, immediately comes to mind Esther Derby. Someone else who has been on this show who I absolutely think the world of, and who's had a great impact on my Agile career, along with Diana Larson with her wonderful books on retrospectives and liftoffs and it's fascinating that this is a community where the people at the top, that there is some diversity. And if you look at the Java community, the .NET community, I don't think they can boast the same advantages that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are leaps and bounds ahead of other communities. But as we say in Agile, we're always looking to continuously improve. So
certainly
that's what we're trying to do.
Yep, continuous improvement is where it's at, and it's great to hear about the efforts that you're leading, Natalie. And I think it's a wonderful addition to our community, and very grateful that you're out there working on this. Because as we had Arlo Belshi on the show a number of months ago, I mean, it was very clear that from his hiring practices, he hires for empathy and for those team skill sets. And if the listeners remember from that discussion, if we're hiring for empathy and skill set and the ability to learn as a second, or as a primary, with coding skills as a secondary, he would hire a team full of women. And he made that very clear that would be the highest performing team in that kind of model. As Agilists, we have these necessary social skills. We have to have empathy for the people we're coaching, because we're meeting them where they're at. We're trying to take them to a new place. We have to be respectful of where they're at, and all these difficult things going on, especially with these, the social networks of people and these different scenarios that we're putting them through. That these skills are important, and having the diversity in our community means we can meet those needs even better. And so I really do appreciate the work you're doing in this space, Natalie. Yeah,
thank you very much. I think it's necessary, and I love that there's so much enthusiasm for it. And like I said, I definitely cannot take all the credit for it. There's a lot of other very smart men and women that are helping on the back end at these events. So if you're interested in getting involved, we're always looking for more people and trying to grow this. Been growing very organically, trying to get a little more structure around it, so it's a little bit more of a repeatable process if people want to try and form that community, at a smaller level within their own areas, getting some some documentation, if you will, but some things out there to help you start, so that you don't feel like you're starting from zero.
One thing that I know is on the mind of every person who is facing a decision: do I go to the extra trouble to represent, my underrepresented group, or do I not? One thing that's always going through those people's heads, and I'm sure it has been true for you as well, Natalie, is, am I going to get pigeonholed that this is my topic? Or are people going to still listen to me about the things other than that brought me into this field in the first place? And so I want to make sure that we talk about some of those other things.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, certainly. And actually, I was going to move into Natalie does a lot of speaking, and I think one of the areas where she's shown a lot of expertise and has done a lot of speaking on is value mapping. And so, Natalie, this is an area that I'm certainly not as fluent as you are, and I was wondering if you could give the listeners an overview of value mapping and perhaps some of the applications, especially on, perhaps product road mapping and other areas like that.
Sure. Yeah. So, when I talk about value, it's really important to understand the context in which we're using the word value in. And if you actually look it up in the dictionary, and this is on a number of my slides, value is either a verb or a noun. And so the way that I relate that is, if we're using value as a verb, right? I value something at a certain amount. I value this feature at X number of dollars. We're really looking at it from a business-centric perspective as far as, hey, what's the ROI that's coming in, or what's the cost savings that I'm going to get? And that's an important thing to do. It's absolutely necessary for us in business. Thinking startups, we need to have our cash flow moving, and obviously larger companies, we need to be making money. However, now if we look at it from the other side of the coin, and we're looking at value as a noun, value is a thing. That is how our customers tend to see value, right? What is this thing, this value that this feature or enhancement or whatever it is going to bring to me? And so I kind of do some comparison and contrasting in a pretty active exercise and say, first, let's look at this list of features. And I actually have, cards with features that I've made up and I kind of tailor to depending on what my audience is. So if it's, at a client, I'll put together cards for, different features that they could be working on or are on their roadmap, and then say, let's organize these based on, value from a business perspective. How much money is this going to make or save us? And then we kind of turn the tables and say, okay, now think about it from a customer perspective, and what's our customer seeing this as? And for that, I use a Kano analysis diagram. And so if you're not familiar with Kano analysis, it really looks at kind of a product life cycle and, what are the new delighter features, the exciting ones that, are really putting us ahead of the market? What are the performance features, the things that are, becoming more commonplace, they're becoming more expected? And then what are the basic needs features? Those are the ones that aren't super sexy, but you know what, if we don't meet those basic needs, we're not going to get people in for those delightful features that are going to make us that money. And that really ties the two together as far as, what kind of revenue do we see, do we feel like we could bring in? And, what customer needs are we actually meeting here from the customer perspective? And so the big thing that I like to talk about there with road mapping is ensuring that, hey, our roadmap needs to have a mix of all these things. If we're doing a ton of new features and we're turning into that feature factory, right, we're probably also accumulating a lot of technical debt. And the one thing I say with that is, customers won't notice necessarily when you pay down your technical debt, but they will notice if you don't. That's kind of a hole that we get into quite frequently when we're trying to put all this new stuff out. We're creating these piles of debt and we need to go back and look at it. And then the other thing we need to keep an eye on is, obviously, we're going to make strategic decisions about which new features we are going to put into our products. And we need to keep an eye on the ones that we decide not to put in, because over time, if we make some wrong decisions or just, some strategic decisions that don't include certain things, if those move down into the performance feature category, the ones that are starting to be more accepted that maybe we didn't hit the mark on, we're probably going to have to take another look back and figure out, do we need to build this in now? It might not be at the head of the market, but is this something that people are starting to expect? So, I have a number of examples in the presentation around, those types of things and how those have affected companies that I've worked with. And so that's kind of how I look at the problem and how I look at, road mapping and understanding what's the mix of different types of work that we're putting into our roadmap, we're planning into our releases, we're planning into our sprints. And that actually brings me a little bit into the discussion that Ryan and I were having earlier around, capacity versus velocity.
Oh, so you want to start that fight?
I mean, we can if you have other questions about value mapping, but I was like, I see an opening here.
Yeah, so...
I'm pretty sure capacity and velocity are the same thing, though, right?
Okay, Amitai's on my side.
I disagree.
I've been planted here to ask dumb questions. It's going really well.
No question's a dumb question.
Not at all. So Natalie, she blogs at nataliewarnert.com, and it's a blog that I follow. I really enjoy it. She posted an article called Capacity versus Velocity. And so one of the key arguments is that velocity and capacity are not the same thing, which I found intriguing. And I'm wondering, Natalie, if you can help educate me, because clearly I'm missing something. Because I've always thought that velocity was really just a capacity measurement. So what have I missed? And actually, what has Amitai missed too? And and how should we really be looking at this?
I'm really big on precise wording. So I try, you maybe will notice, as I said before, I looked up value in a dictionary. I have not looked up velocity because that's going to probably not give me the Agile definition. But velocity is, yes, a factor of a team's capacity. However, I think that in a lot of organizations I've seen, some people see velocity as one thing and other people see it as another. So some people see velocity as a synonym for capacity. Some people see velocity as something else. And the argument I'm really making is, honestly, I don't care what word you use for describing that, but make sure you understand how other people are interpreting that word. So what I really talk about in the post is that sometimes velocity is talked about as the amount of new feature work that we can get done within a sprint. And that's fine. But if we're using that as a synonym for capacity and we're not looking at only new feature work, and this goes into, I don't want to get into this, but this goes into, do we estimate defects? Do we estimate, spikes, those types of things? That directly ties into that conversation. But the thing that I want to avoid is having a product owner say, okay, our velocity is 20. Therefore, when I am drawing out a rough release plan, and I'm not advocating that the team is not involved, but sometimes that's how it happens. When I'm drawing out this rough release plan, I'm going to put 20 points in each sprint because our velocity is 20. Well, if we look back at what was actually in those sprints that we got to 20-ish, right? That velocity range. Well, some of it was new features, some of it was defects, some of it was technical debt. So if I'm planning in 20 points of new feature work each sprint, I'm not accounting for those other things that are inevitably going to be in that sprint. Therefore, I am going to overcommit for a sprint or for a release. Now, again, this is talking in generalities that maybe my product owner is forecasting for my team and isn't involving my team. And I know that absolutely never happens, but just in case it does,
happens a lot.
This is the conversation that we want to have. And so, like I said, I don't really care what we call it, but let's make sure we're, first of all, speaking the same language. And second of all, make sure that we have an understanding of the things that make up our sprints. Just like I was talking about before, make sure we have an understanding of the things that make up our roadmap, and making sure that, there's an appropriate balance for those things, and that we're not overcommitting one type of work because we don't understand what's actually behind the number. Sometimes we get so caught up in that number that we don't end up understanding it anymore.
I think the framework you've laid out here, and what the equation that you used that sums it up was sprint work, or in other words, capacity, equals new features, or in other words, velocity, plus tech debt, plus defects, plus overhead, plus unknown. I think the good thing that does is that it brings visibility into the type of work that the team is being asked to perform. And it's not always clear or apparent that tech debt, defects, overhead, and just the unknown things like appointments, vacations, other things are going to cut into capacity. I love the distinction that you're making, that there are different types of work.
Yeah, and I think that really goes into, I said I didn't want to get into the discussion, but I'll just state it once more. It goes into the fact that some teams don't estimate technical debt, some teams don't estimate defects or overhead, then yes, your velocity probably is your capacity if you're only estimating, what your new feature work is. And then the other things are just there, and maybe those are a count or something instead of actually having story points on them. However, if you're estimating everything, which some teams do, then you really need to have that distinction as to what's in there from a percentage perspective, points perspective, so you can accurate as as you can be with estimating forecast.
So as I'm thinking through this, if I have a team that can, and first of all, listeners know that story points are not a great, or we're not big fans of story points on the Agile for Humans podcast. But if you are using them, and I think a lot of teams use them as an entry point to Agile estimation and planning, and I think that's important. It's important to get a feel for how that works. Eventually,
it's important to have the conversation.
Absolutely.
Is what I say.
Well, and if your business partners and your product owners want to work in that manner, that's part of collaboration too. And so I think it's important to always meet the needs of those that you're serving, or as a team, to meet the needs of those who are writing the check. That's always important. So with that said, though, if you see capacity as, let's say the team in your example has 20 velocity or 20 story points of capacity, that capacity will be chewed up by all of the various different types of product backlog items, which include features, bugs or defects, and all of those other things. And so that's, I think, where I get lost with the terminology, which is really probably more of a semantical argument than anything, is that if we have 20 story points, it really doesn't matter what kind of work it is. There's 20 story points worth of capacity, and that's all that's really going to get done during the sprint.
Yes.
So.
Yes, and so I'll try and rephrase what I was saying before. The issue that I was running into with that, calling it capacity or velocity, was my product owners saw 20 and said, okay, I'm planning out 20 points of new feature work for each sprint in the release. And that didn't take into account the other things that, made up those 20, because they just saw 20 and said, all right, 20 is my number I can forecast on.
Well, and what I like about the way that you've laid it out for the product owner, I think part of it is just coaching the product owner about all of the different types of product backlog items. But I also think the more interesting coaching conversation, and you actually pulled some graphs from a good friend of the show, Aaron Copel, and showed technical debt, defects, and overhead chew into velocity. And I think that's also a very important discussion. So a lot of teams will also run into the situation where a product owner will say, well, why would I invest in technical debt? I have these 10 features that will make us money. And what the discussion which you typically try to bring it back around to, if you don't address a technical debt, you won't get these 10 features. When you think you're forecasting it out, it'll actually be further out because we can't deliver software sooner because these things are blocking us. And that's always an interesting conversation. What I like is that you're making it very explicit that these things will impact velocity. These are all factors of velocity. And for that, I think it's just a wonderful article, aside from a semantical argument that coaches like us should really only have over drinks and after a long day at a conference. So. Yeah. So, I think that's really important is, being able to visualize how this stuff affects us. And I think a lot of times when we don't actually see those visuals, we end up in the place where, we have too much technical debt, and why can't we deliver this stuff faster? Well, it's because we're not doing this. Or, why is my velocity going down? Well, it's because of this or this.
Metrics in a microcosm, right? Like there's a number that we decided to track. There's a picture we decided that we're going to pay attention to. And then all the other things we could track or pay attention to are not on our radar at all. And the number and the picture get interpreted individually by every person that ever sees them.
Yeah, that reminds me of a metrics talk I did a couple of years ago when we talked about metrics need to have an end date. Because if we get so inundated with a certain metric, we're going to become blind to a lot of other things. We're only going to focus on that one thing, and then there's going to be a lot of things that are going to creep up on us. And so, making sure that we're keeping our peripheral vision sharp.
Well, they say what gets measured gets managed, but I think what people forget is that the people being measured are managing that metric too.
Absolutely. Every metric can be gamed, and every metric will be gamed. It's not, behaviors will change toward that metric, and it's not necessarily malicious. It's just that's the way that we behave.
And so
I'm not quite on Woody Zuhl's level, but I have a little aphorism about that I've really distilled down to my favorite form, which is careful what you measure because you'll get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote a blog post a few years ago about one of my teams, and this was a very positive interaction, but we were in sprint planning, and they said, "Oh, well, wait, we should break this story down smaller because then our burn down will go faster." And they kind of looked at me like, haha. And I'm like, yes, you do that. That sounds fantastic.
So where else are you finding that teams struggle with this concept, Natalie? You've got a lot of experience in the field, especially having these talks around estimation, metrics, velocity, capacity. Where are some of the pitfalls that other coaches can look out for?
I'm not going to say that I'm in, strongly in either one of the camps for estimating or no estimates. It's what works best at the time for the team. But I was going to say that's something that teams have a really hard time with. That's something that's really hard to train on, is the idea of looking at work, even if it's a relative number, trying to assign it to that based on so many things such as complexity and effort and all those things. That's something that teams have a really hard time with. More often than not, they still end up converting those numbers back to hours and days and things that make sense to them. That's always a little bit difficult, regardless of the way that you think of it. I really just like, honestly, going to counts of things. Say, hey, all right, we got 3 bugs in this sprint. We're going to try and do 3 bugs every sprint. And, that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to assume that over time, those are going to average out to be about the same size. And people don't seem to like that, but I like it. We have discussions around that and what's actually the outcome that we're looking for here. And if we're spending so much time trying to get to the quote right answer, then we're probably already wrong. That's one of the arguments I'm sure a lot of coaches can empathize with. Otherwise, just really around making sure at a higher level that leadership is understanding of what some of these metrics mean. And, going back to our metrics conversation, right? Why do you want to measure what you're measuring? What improvements are we looking to get? And ultimately, what outcome are you trying to get? I had a conversation. I've had a number of conversations around output, saying, I don't really care how much output we're doing. We can do more, we can do less, but are we meeting the outcome? And just talking about goals around that. And I think that's a really hard concept too for a lot of people who are really focused on numbers and that throughput, when we're not actually looking back at, what is the outcome we're trying to get, bringing that back to our customer value as well as our business value. And it really becomes a big cyclical thing. And a lot of these things, obviously, as we know, tie very closely together.
I think at this point, we've settled the velocity versus capacity discussion. So no fight broke out there. The estimate one, perhaps we'll pick that one up another time. But
I think you should have Woody on to talk about that.
Oh, we have. Woody's been on a number of times, as has Neil Killick, Vasco Duarte. Yeah.
I've talked to Vasco before, and Woody obviously too. Don't put me against them. I don't want to get into an argument either.
No. And you know what? We actually, we just had Steve McConnell on, who's on the opposite end of no estimate. Steve McConnell, I think you're probably familiar with him. He wrote Software Estimation, Demystifying the Black Art.
Oh, yep.
And so he's hardcore estimation and came on and made really good points. And so for me, it's just, can we just simplify it down to counting cards, measuring throughput, looking at cycle time, and make adjustments? And then forecast off that?
That's something that I
also,
love.
I
was just going to say, into a lot of my Agile trainings, obviously I'm training Scrum and I'm training, those concepts, but I also try and very heavily integrate lean concepts and talking about, those different metrics, cycle time, throughput. Honestly, I never thought I would say this, but I reference the goal more than I ever thought I would.
Mhm.
I had to read it in undergrad. I had to read it in grad school. And
Really?
both times I'm like, yeah, this is okay. And now I'm like, hey, you should read this. Like, this is a good book to understand the theory of constraints, understand throughput. This is coming from manufacturing, but hey, we can really apply it to software.
That's super
Oh,
cool.
yeah.
And like, it's part of an undergraduate program, part of a graduate program. Is that common?
I don't know. My undergrad,
Wouldn't have
I had a BBA in a major in information systems, but that was in an ops management class that I took. And then grad school, it was in an accounting class that I took. So I was
That's
surprised
awesome.
to see it again. But it stood the test of time.
Should I admit
Eli
that?
Goldratt is a smart guy.
Should I admit that I've never read The Goal?
Dude,
Oh,
you
you
have
should
to read
read
it.
it.
That is the book that I felt like I could see the Matrix.
All right.
It was awesome.
I'll
And
get
I
It's
mean,
not hard to read.
the storyline is kind of corny. I mean, it's a story. It's a little bit corny, but it does a really good job of explaining the concepts. As a lot of people know, people hold on to stories. They remember stories. They don't necessarily remember, hey, here's 2 pages on the theory of constraints and bottlenecks and whatever.
I will.
You'll have to let us know what you think of Herbie.
Okay. Well, that means you'll have to come back on and talk through it.
Absolutely. It's a great book.
So, Natalie, at this point of the show, because I know we're keeping you up and don't want to go too far over the time box. So, during this part of the show, we welcome our guest to promote anything they have going on, any books, any talks coming up, any websites, any blog posts, how people can reach you if you want to open yourself up to Twitter conversations or anything like that. So the floor is yours. Promote away.
All right. Well, I think the biggest one is I hope to see many people at the Women in Agile event at Agile 2017. Pretty confident that will be approved. Looking at the Sunday before the conference, I believe Sunday, August 6th in Orlando, Florida. That will be there. It's most likely going to be for most of the afternoon, and looking to get some really good keynotes. I have one in mind right now that she's outside of the Agile community, and it should be really interesting. It's a lot about empowerment and some really neat women in STEM things. And then obviously we'll have some folks from our near and dear community as well. Otherwise, for me, let's see, I will be at Agile and Beyond talking about value mapping in early May up in Ann Arbor. I will be at Agile Indie, hopefully doing a little bit of women in Agile stuff there. That's the second Friday in May. Hopefully I'll definitely be at Agile 2017. Contact me. I'm on Twitter. My handle is at Natalie Warnert. I also have, as Ryan mentioned, I have my blog site. That's nataliewarnert.com. Feel free to comment. No books yet, percolating on some topics. So if you have anything you think I should write about, feel free to share it. Otherwise, just, go out and, help to empower others, extend that personal invitation, and, really challenge yourself to think about, hey, what can I do to help make the Agile community better, and help get more people involved in the Agile community so that we have more ideas flowing and more ideas to share.
Very good. Thank you. Amitai, what have you got going on?
Well, I got a few things. One is called Agile and Beyond, which I heard is really cool from someone named Natalie Warnert.
Hey.
I will be there as well with a workshop called The Best Team Anywhere, Distributed Agile Trade-Offs and Techniques, focused on remote pairing and mobbing, other technical stuff. I will also be at the second Agile Alliance Technical Conference with a DevOps-themed workshop. And also, now that I live in New York, it will be very easy for me to go to Agile Coach Camp in New York. And I recommend that for anyone who is coaching or is interested in coaching. You learn a lot real fast because it's an open space. But none of that is super important. What is super important is after over a year hiatus, Agile in 3 Minutes is back. And season 3, as Ryan mentioned earlier in the show, begins with Johanna Rothman talking about, the title of the episode is Manage. So take a listen, share your feedback with Johanna and or me. And I would love, if you have someone in mind that you would like to hear 3 minutes from, let me know who that is. That's it. Thank you.
I do have to say that episode with Johanna is amazing. If you have, or if you're working with a manager new to Agile, it's probably the most important 3 minutes they can listen to. Johanna has just masterfully laid out what a manager does on an Agile team, the different types of management on an Agile team. And it really is one of those quick bursts of just amazing wisdom and insight that she lays down that can really help bring clarity to those who are struggling with this new role. So really brilliant work there, Amitai.
Yeah, I got lucky having someone do brilliant work.
Yes. Well, you extended the invitation, and Johanna, as always, came back with something really powerful. So it was really good. So really appreciate you putting that out there. As for me, I'm on Twitter at Ryan Ripley. I will be at Agile Coach Camp, like Amitai mentioned. So heading out to New York, and we'll certainly check that out. I have a few proposals out there for speaking right now. I will be at ADC West, the TechWell event out in Las Vegas in June 4th through the 9th. I am presenting on the No Estimates movement, and I'm also doing a half-day workshop on Advanced Scrum, answering the questions that come after the 2-day course. And so would love to see all the listeners out there. Come on out to Agile Dev West. I'll also be heading over to Agile Indy. I never miss an Agile Indy, unless I'm having a child, or I should say my wife's having a child. So last year I had to miss it, but this year I will be back. Also planning on making a trip over to Columbus, Ohio for Path to Agility. Faye Thompson and the great people at CareWorks have put together another great event, and always look forward to heading over to Columbus at the Ohio State University to see Faye and the CareWorks crew and what they've put together. Other than that, there might be a few other stops along the way, but we'll keep everyone up to date. The website's ryanripley.com. Questions, comments, feedback, general opinions, always welcome. Would love to hear from you, the listener. And I think that's all I've got. So Amitai, Natalie, great conversation. Natalie, I hope you join us for many more of these. Really enjoyed getting to bounce a few ideas off you, and sorry for keeping you up so late.
No worries. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yep, anytime. You have an open invite. So if you see us online recording, feel free to pop in. Amitai, great getting to catch up with you. Real excited about your move to New York and all the great things coming your way. And so thanks for sharing time with us. And to the listener, I love it that you're here. The numbers keep going up. The downloads are skyrocketing. I'm just so humbled and grateful that you guys are sharing the show, enjoying the show, sharing your feedback on Twitter. It just, it's really great to see that. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And everyone, have a great night.
Thanks for listening to Agile for Humans. Let's keep the conversation going. Drop us a question on Twitter @AgileForHumans or visit agileforhumans.com.